January 12, 1943, Berlin, Germany. Snow fell in gentle flurries outside the windows of the Air Ministry as Generaloberst Hans Jeschonek reviewed the latest Luftwaffe strength reports with quiet satisfaction. With nearly 300 fighters defending the Reich and occupied territories, and the world's most experienced pilots at the controls, he believed Germany's air superiority would continue indefinitely, despite growing Allied bombing campaigns. The Luftwaffe's Chief of Staff could not have imagined that in just 18 months, the skies over Europe would tell a completely different story. One where American long-range fighters would systematically dismantle the once mighty German Air Force. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the account of how technological innovation, industrial might, and strategic vision transformed the air war over Europe, forcing German pilots to witness their perceived invincibility collapse into the brutal reality of overwhelming American air dominance. Hauptmann Karl-Heinz Weber settled into his Messerschmitt Bf 109G's cockpit at Wiesbaden Airfield, methodically reviewing his instrumentation as he had done hundreds of times before. At 24 years old, Weber had already accumulated 600 combat hours and claimed 17 Allied aircraft. The frosty January morning chilled him through his flight jacket as ground crews completed final preparations on his fighter. Weber's fighter group, Jagdgeschwader 27, represented the elite of the Luftwaffe's defensive force, with experienced pilots who had fought across multiple fronts from the Battle of Britain to the Mediterranean and Eastern Front. Another day hunting bombers. Weber told his wingman, Lieutenant Franz Müller, a 21-year-old with 8 kills to his name, "Those Americans don't learn. Their bombers come without proper escort, and we pick them off. It's almost too easy." Müller nodded, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "The FW-190s will handle the bombers, will focus on any escorts they bring, but they never come far enough to matter." Weber smiled confidently. The Thunderbolts turn back at the German border. By summer, the Americans will realize their daylight bombing campaign is suicide. 500 miles away in Bushy Hall, England, Colonel James Howard of the 354th Fighter Group studied weather reports for the upcoming mission. The 354th had only been in the European theatre for a month, and Howard, a former Flying Tiger with experience fighting Japanese Zeros in China, knew his pilots were still adjusting to European combat conditions. But they had something new. The North American P-51B Mustang, recently fitted with the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, giving it unprecedented range and performance. "Gentlemen," Howard addressed his pilots during the pre-dawn briefing, "today we're escorting B-17s to targets near Frankfurt, but we're not turning back at the border like the P-47s. We're going all the way to the target and back." Captain John Sanders, a 23-year-old pilot from Nebraska, raised his hand. "Sir, that's over 800 miles round trip. No fighter has done that before." Howard nodded. "The Mustang changes everything. With our drop tanks, we have the range. The Germans don't expect fighters over their territory. They'll be surprised today." Lieutenant Thomas Williams studied the map with intensity. At 22, he had never seen combat, but had excelled in training. "The intelligence report says the Luftwaffe has nearly 300 fighters across all fronts. How many will we face today?" "Intelligence estimates between 60 and 80 defending Frankfurt," Howard replied. "But remember, they don't know we're coming. Not with this range. That's our advantage." As the American pilots prepared for their mission back in Berlin, Major General Adolf Galland, the general of the fighter arm, was reviewing production reports that told a concerning story. While the Luftwaffe maintained impressive numbers on paper, 950 fighters in January 1943, the reality was more complex. Fuel shortages limited training for new pilots to less than 150 flight hours compared to over 350 for American pilots. German aircraft factories produced 843 new fighters monthly, but losses were averaging 730, creating a razor-thin margin for sustainability. "We're barely replacing our losses," Galland told his staff, "and pilot quality is declining. New recruits receive half the training time I had in 1939. His aide, Captain Werner Molders, reviewed the intelligence reports. The Americans sent 168 bombers against Wilhelmshaven last week. We shot down 7 but lost 22 fighters. The mathematics is not in our favor. Galland's concerns weren't solely about numbers. The Bf-109, the backbone of the Luftwaffe fighter force, was increasingly outclassed. The latest G model carried a heavier armament and armor, reducing its maneuverability and climb rate, while its combat radius remained limited to about 440 miles. American bombers flew with fighter escorts to the German border, where the P-47 Thunderbolts had to turn back due to fuel limitations, leaving a critical vulnerability window that German fighters exploited ruthlessly. "Our strategy remains sound," Galland reassured his officers. "We concentrate on the bombers when their escorts turn back. The Americans cannot sustain these losses indefinitely." What Galland didn't know was that the rules of the air war were about to change dramatically. At 0830 hours, the drone of engines filled the English countryside as 244 B-17 Flying Fortresses from the 8th Air Force took off, climbing to 25,000 feet for their bombing run to Frankfurt's industrial district. Among them was the 351st Bomb Group, including a B-17F nicknamed Desert Rat, piloted by Captain David Harrison. "Another milk run," joked co-pilot Lieutenant Robert Taylor, using the sarcastic bomber crew term for dangerous missions. "Nothing milk about it," Harrison replied, checking his oxygen mask. 800 miles round trip, half of it unescorted if intelligence is correct. Navigator Lieutenant Samuel Cohen plotted their course. "P-47s will take us to the border, then we're on our own until the target. After bombing, they'll pick us up for the return leg." Tail Gunner Sergeant Michael O'Malley tested his .50 caliber machine guns, the mechanism smooth from meticulous maintenance. "That's a lot of time for the Luftwaffe to work us over. Last week, Baker Squadron lost 5 birds over Emden. Intelligence says something new today," Harrison told his crew. "Some P-51s might go all the way with us, but I'll believe that when I see it." 2 hours into the mission, as the bomber stream crossed into German airspace, the P-47 Thunderbolts of the 56th Fighter Group rocked their wings in the universal pilot gesture of departure. Their drop tanks were empty, fuel reserves calculated precisely for the return to England. "Tail end Charlie to all stations," O'Malley reported from his position. "Thunderbolts are turning back. Keep your eyes peeled." Harrison nodded grimly. "Here's where it gets interesting." Near Cologne, Hauptmann Weber and 36 fighters from JG-27 climbed to intercept the bomber formation, German radar having tracked the Americans since they crossed the North Sea. Ground controllers directed the Luftwaffe fighters precisely, positioning them for a head-on attack to break up the bomber formation. 2 o'clock high," Weber called to his squadron. "I count at least 40 bombers, no escort visible, standard attack pattern, concentrate on the lead bombers." The German fighters climbed above the bomber stream, positioning for their preferred diving attack. Weber led his section into a steep dive, aiming for the lead bomber squadron. The tactics were well practiced: disrupt the formation, force bombers to break away from the protective envelope of coordinated defensive fire, then pick off the stragglers. "Bandits! 12 o'clock high!" O'Malley shouted from the tail position of Desert Rat. "At least 20 plus." Throughout the bomber formation, gunners swiveled their weapons, preparing for the onslaught as German fighters dove through their formation. What happened next would be recorded in both American and German battle reports as a pivotal moment in the air war. As Weber led his fighters toward the bombers, His wingman suddenly called out, "Fighters! Above us! Not thunderbolts!" Weber looked up in disbelief. No Allied fighter should have had the range to be this deep in German airspace. Sleek, long-nosed fighters with distinctive airframes dove toward his formation from 30 feet. The P-51 Mustangs of the 354th Fighter Group had arrived, and they held the altitude advantage. Colonel Howard led the first attack personally, diving on the unsuspecting Luftwaffe fighters. "They're focusing on the bombers," he radioed. "They don't see us. Take them before they hit the forts." In Desert Rat, O'Malley watched in astonishment. "I don't believe it! Fighters with bubble canopies! They're engaging the Germans before they reach us." Harrison couldn't contain his surprise. "Those must be the Mustangs. They actually made it this far." The first engagement lasted less than 2 minutes, but changed the dynamic entirely. The Mustangs caught the German fighters out of position, shooting down 7 while disrupting their carefully planned attack on the bomber formation. Weber managed to evade the initial American attack, but watched in shock as 3 of his squadron mates went down in flames. "Break off! Climb to engage the escorts," Weber ordered, abandoning the attack on the bombers. For the first time, the Luftwaffe found itself forced to deal with escort fighters hundreds of miles inside Germany, fundamentally changing the tactical situation. The bombers continued to their target with minimal losses, while the fighters engaged in swirling dogfights 5 miles above the German countryside. Lieutenant Williams found himself facing a Bf-109 in his first combat engagement. The German fighter, piloted by an experienced ace, attempted to use its superior rate of climb to gain advantage. Williams, remembering his training, kept his energy up, using the Mustang's exceptional high-altitude performance to maintain position. When the 109 stalled out, trying to climb away, Williams put his gun sight on the German fighter and fired a 3-second burst from his 650 caliber machine guns. The 109 erupted in flames, spiraling toward the ground. "Mustang 3, Splash 1 Messerschmitt," Williams reported, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. By the time the bomber formation reached Frankfurt, dropped their payloads and turned for home, the Luftwaffe had lost 17 fighters while shooting down only 3 B-17s and 2 Mustangs. It was an exchange rate that could not be sustained, and German commanders knew it immediately. That evening, as Weber debriefed at Wiesbaden with only 23 of the 36 pilots who had taken off that morning, the reality began to sink in. "They were not supposed to be there," he told his squadron commander. "No Allied fighter has the range to reach Frankfurt. These new fighters stayed with the bombers the entire time." Major Heinrich Kraft, the squadron commander, looked grim. It was the same over Hamburg today. New American fighters, Mustangs, escorted the entire mission. Jagdgeschwader 11 lost 11 aircraft. The operations staff is requesting immediate information on this new threat. That night, General Galland received reports from all fighter units engaged during the day. The total told a devastating story. 38 German fighters lost against 12 American aircraft. More concerning was the confirmation that P-51 Mustangs had escorted bombers all the way to targets deep inside Germany. "This changes everything," Galland told his staff. "If they can escort the bombers all the way to the target and back, our entire defense strategy is compromised." His intelligence officer presented the technical assessment of the P-51. "The Americans have installed the British Merlin engine in the Mustang airframe. It gives them a range of over 1,800 miles with drop tanks. They can reach any target in Germany from England, outperform our fighters above 25,000 feet, and they're just beginning to deploy in numbers." The numbers were concerning. Intelligence estimated that fewer than 250 P-51s were currently in the European theater, but production figures showed North American aviation was manufacturing over 700 per month. By comparison, Germany's combined fighter production across all types averaged 843 monthly. If these production figures are accurate, Gallen noted, they will soon have more Mustangs alone than we have total fighters, and this is just one of their fighter types. The impact of the Mustang's arrival was immediately apparent in the 8th Air Force's operations planning. Colonel Howard and his 354th Fighter Group received commendations, while bomber commanders suddenly found their mission options expanded dramatically. Where previously targets had been selected based on the limited range of escorting fighters, now virtually any location in the Reich could be targeted with fighter protection. In London, General Jimmy Doolittle, who had recently taken command of the 8th Air Force, recognized the strategic opportunity immediately. "Gentlemen, the P-51 changes our entire strategy," he told his staff. "From now on, our fighters are freed from close escort duty. Their primary mission is to engage and destroy the Luftwaffe, in the air, on the ground, wherever they find them." This fundamental shift in tactics would prove devastating. Rather than focusing solely on protecting bombers, Mustang pilots were encouraged to aggressively seek out and destroy German fighters. The change was codified in a directive Doolittle issued: "The destruction of German fighters is our main purpose." By February 1943, the pattern had become clear to the Luftwaffe High Command. Major Werner Streib, a night fighter ace who had been reassigned to defense analysis, presented the stark mathematics to Göring's staff. "We lost 293 fighters in January, with 39 pilots killed, 167 wounded, and 49 missing," Streib reported. "Production delivered 852 new aircraft, but many are being sent to the Russian front or Mediterranean. Our net fighter strength for Reich defense decreased by 98 aircraft despite production increases." Göring dismissed these concerns. "The Führer has promised increased production. By summer we will have over 4,000 fighters." Streib persisted. "Even at 4,000 aircraft, if loss rates continue at the January pace, we cannot sustain effective defense. The Americans lost 271 bombers and 52 fighters in the same period, but produced 724 heavy bombers and 800 fighters in that month alone." By April 1943, the situation had deteriorated further. The Mustang was appearing in greater numbers, and German pilots faced a new psychological reality. There was no longer any sanctuary in the skies over the Reich. Lieutenant Franz Müller, Weber's wingman, expressed this new reality in a letter home. "We no longer control the air, even over our own territory. Yesterday we intercepted bombers near Leipzig and immediately faced Mustangs that outnumbered us 2-1. They seem to be everywhere, with endless fuel and ammunition. We fight until we are low on fuel, disengage, and by the time we land, refuel and relaunch, the Americans have been replaced by fresh fighters. We fly 4 sorties daily. Their pilots fly once and return to England." The disparity in industrial capacity became increasingly evident. By May 1943, American factories produced 119 fighter aircraft in a single month, with over 850 being P-51 Mustangs. Germany's total fighter production for the same month was 915 aircraft, with 30% immediately shipped to other fronts. The human factor compounded the material disparity. German pilot training programs, severely constrained by fuel shortages, reduced basic flight training to just 112 hours compared to the 360 hours American pilots received. New Luftwaffe pilots arrived at frontline units with barely enough skill to handle their aircraft, let alone engage in combat with experienced American pilots. Oberst Hannes Trautloft, commander of fighter forces defending central Germany, described the deteriorating situation in his June 1943 report. "We are sending boys against men. The average American pilot now has more combat experience than our new replacements have total flight time. Our experienced pilots are being lost through attrition, and replacements lack fundamental combat skills. The impact on German industrial capacity was devastating. In January, American bombing accuracy averaged only 5% of bombs falling within 1 or 0 feet of the aiming point when unescorted. By July, with Mustangs suppressing Luftwaffe interceptors, accuracy improved to 26%. Production at key facilities plummeted. The Focke-Wulf factory at Marienburg saw production decrease from 40 fighters monthly to just 8 after precision bombing attacks in August 1943. As summer turned to fall, the systematic destruction of the Luftwaffe accelerated. Doolittle's strategy of targeting German fighters rather than simply protecting bombers paid devastating dividends. On October 14, 1943, the 8th Air Force launched the second Schweinfurt raid against German ball-bearing factories. Unlike the first raid in August, which saw 60 bombers lost due to limited fighter escort, this mission had Mustang coverage throughout. The Luftwaffe still managed to mount a significant defense, but lost 38 fighters while shooting down 26 bombers. Hauptmann Weber, now one of the few surviving pilots from his original squadron, described the October air battles in his combat diary. "We no longer fight on our terms. Before, we could mass our fighters, attack the bombers, and withdraw before escorts could intervene. Now the Mustangs are waiting above us before we even take off. They strafe our airfields, destroy our aircraft on the ground, and shoot us down when we attempt to climb to altitude." The numbers told the story of a force in terminal decline. By December 1943, the Luftwaffe had lost over 400 fighters in the west, with another 700 lost on the Eastern Front. December production peaked at 1,016 new fighters, but this now represented less than half the combined Anglo-American monthly production of P-51s, P-47s, and Spitfires. The human toll was equally devastating. Of the 500 German fighter pilots active in January 1943, fewer than 800 remained in service by year's end. Those lost included experienced leaders like Werner Mölders and dozens of other aces with irreplaceable combat knowledge. The Mustang's impact extended beyond the air war to affect German strategy across all fronts. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, preparing for the expected Allied invasion in France, wrote to Hitler's headquarters in February 1944, "Our forces cannot move by day due to complete Allied air supremacy. Any defensive position we establish is identified and bombed within hours. Without air cover, our ability to repel an invasion is severely compromised." Desperate to address the fighter shortage, the Luftwaffe implemented emergency fighter program in early 1944, redirecting resources from bomber production entirely to fighters. Innovative designs like the Me-262 jet fighter offered technological solutions, but industrial capacity had been so damaged by bombing that production remained a fraction of requirements. The Me-262, despite its 100 mm of speed advantage over the Mustang, never deployed in sufficient numbers to affect the air war's outcome. The psychological impact on German pilots was profound. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, who would survive the war with 176 victories, described the changing mindset. "In 1940, we hunted alone or in pairs over England, confident in our superiority. By 1944, we moved only in large formations for mutual protection, yet still found ourselves overwhelmed by American fighters." The statistics for May 1944, the month before D-Day, illustrated the complete reversal of fortune. German fighter pilot losses reached 25% of available strength monthly, while American replacement rates exceeded losses by a factor of 3. 8th Air Force bomber loss rates dropped from 2% per mission in January 1943 to 5% in May 1944, despite larger and deeper missions. Captain John Sanders, now a Mustang ace with 8 victories, described the hunting tactics developed by American fighter groups. We'd send a flight of 4 Mustangs ahead as bait, flying below the clouds. When the Germans rose to intercept, 2 more flights would drop from above. They couldn't refuse combat. If they did, we'd follow them to their bases and strafe them on the ground. D-Day marked the beginning of the final phase of the Luftwaffe's destruction. The Allies achieved virtually complete air supremacy over the invasion beaches, with German fighters conspicuously absent. On June 6th, Luftwaffe 3, responsible for air defense in France, could launch only 319 sorties across all aircraft types, compared to more than 12 Su-30 Allied aircraft sorties. Major General Galland's situation report on July 15, 1944, laid bare the reality. Luftwaffe fighter strength in the West has effectively ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. We have fewer than 300 operational fighters facing over 4 Su-30 Allied aircraft. Our loss rates exceed 50% of available strength monthly, while pilot losses cannot be replaced with qualified personnel. By this point, American fighter production reached its peak, with North American aviation delivering 1 375 P-51 Mustangs in July 1944 alone, more than Germany's entire fighter production that month. The American training system produced 200 new fighter pilots monthly, each with at least 360 flight hours. The Luftwaffe's training program, now compressed to less than 50 hours due to fuel shortages, graduated fewer than 300 pilots, most of whom would be lost within weeks. The endgame played out through the summer of 1944. American fighter groups roamed across German airspace almost unchallenged, systematically targeting any Luftwaffe activity. The German oil campaign, precision bombing of synthetic fuel plants, reduced aviation fuel production by 90%, grounding many remaining German fighters regardless of pilot availability or mechanical condition. In his last combat mission on August 18, 1944, Hauptmann Weber led 6 Bf-109s against an American bomber formation near Munich. His squadron, once 36 aircraft strong, now struggled to put half a dozen fighters into the air. We were climbing through 15,000 feet when my wingman called out fighters high above us, Weber later recounted from a prisoner of war camp. At least 20 Mustangs were waiting at 25,000 feet. We had no choice but to engage. Turning back would only delay the inevitable. 4 of our 6 aircraft were shot down in the first pass. My engine was hit, forcing me to bail out. My war ended watching my aircraft crash into the Bavarian countryside. When Allied forces crossed the German border in September 1944, the Luftwaffe's fighter force existed largely on paper. Of the approximately 800 fighters still on strength, fewer than 300 could fly on any given day due to fuel and spare parts shortages. German aircraft production, despite Albert Speer's remarkable improvisation with dispersed factories, produced its last significant numbers in September 1944, before Allied bombing reduced output to a trickle. The final irony came in the war's last months. The Luftwaffe, which began 1943 with nearly 3 U-0 fighters, found itself unable to even protect its revolutionary Me-262 jets on the ground. American Mustangs, the very aircraft that had systematically dismantled German air power, now patrolled over jet bases, shooting down the advanced fighters during their vulnerable takeoff and landing phases. By January 1945, exactly 18 months after the Mustang's introduction in significant numbers, the Luftwaffe fighter force had been virtually eliminated as an effective fighting organization. Galland, relieved of his command after disagreements with Goering, summarized the collapse. We failed to recognize that this war would be decided by industrial capacity rather than by tactical brilliance or individual courage. The Mustang represented everything we could not match: innovation, production capacity, and strategic vision. On May 7, 1945, as German representatives signed surrender documents, the balance sheet of the air war told the final story. The United States had produced over 400 P-51 Mustangs during the war, more than Germany's total fighter production of all types in 1943 and 1944 combined. American factories delivered 293 aircraft during the war years, while Germany produced 119 871. This 3-to-1 advantage in production, coupled with the Mustang's qualitative edge, made the outcome inevitable once the P-51 extended Allied fighter range to cover the entire Reich. After the war, a comprehensive United States strategic bombing survey interviewed key Luftwaffe leaders about the air campaign's impact. General Adolf Galland's assessment was unequivocal. The Mustang was the turning point. When American fighters could escort bombers to every corner of Germany, our defeat was inevitable. The wonder is not that we were defeated, but that we could resist as long as we did. Colonel Howard, whose 354th Fighter Group was first to demonstrate the Mustang's potential over Frankfurt in January 1943, would be awarded the Medal of Honor for single-handedly defending a bomber formation against overwhelming odds. After the war, he reflected on the Mustang's impact. Before the P-51, bomber crews flew into Germany, knowing they would face unescorted combat. The Mustang changed everything, not just tactically, but psychologically. We could tell bomber crews, "We'll be with you all the way," and mean it. The P-51's transformation of the air war represented more than just technological innovation. It demonstrated how industrial capacity, strategic vision, and operational excellence combined to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. The Luftwaffe, which had dominated European skies for years, found itself systematically dismantled by an adversary that could replace losses at 3 times the rate they could be inflicted, while operating aircraft with superior high-altitude performance and range. For pilots like Hauptmann Weber, the war's outcome became apparent long before the final surrender. From his prisoner of war camp in April 1945, he wrote, "We began with the world's best air force and ended with barely the capacity to defend our own airfields. The Americans didn't just defeat us, they made our defeat inevitable through industrial might that produced more fighters each month than we could destroy in combat." The story of the Luftwaffe's destruction by P-51 Mustangs represents one of history's most dramatic reversals of military fortune, demonstrating how quickly air superiority can shift when technology, industrial capacity, and strategy align. From January 1943, when German fighters ruled the skies over Europe, to July 1944, when they could barely mount effective resistance, the transformation was complete, a testament to American industrial might and the game-changing capabilities of a remarkable aircraft. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.